The Iliad and Odyssey, Act 9 by Rosemary Sutcliff. This is the last act of Black Ships Before Troy, and so we have a fewer number of vocabulary words, but they include a brow as a person's forehead, a comb is a holder of hair or fibers, an altar, a table used for religious rites, a rite is a sacred or holy ceremony, a shield boss is a metal plate in the center of the shield. Flinch, quick nervous move. A lot is an object used to decide by chance. In other words, you're trying to make a decision, so people draw lots, like who gets the shortest straw or whatever. Lot can also be a piece of property or a bunch of something, a lot, right? So that's a multiple meaning word. Glare means to stare angrily. Don't forget about your homophones. Homophones have the same sound, but they are spelled differently and they have different meanings. Meanwhile, Helen, who was at home among her women and weaving a great purple cloak on her loom, heard of the coming fight between Paris and her marriage lord. She left her weaving and flung a veil over her head and hurried to the roof of the nearest gate tower. King Priam was there already, and some of his elders with him, looking out over the plain of the two great armies gathered below. This is a great graphic of a loom and a woman sitting in front of a loom weaving, and you can see how that would work. Seeing her come, the old men murmured among themselves that there had been no shame all this while in fighting to keep so fair a lady, but that now it would be a fine thing for Troy if she were to go back to her first lord and her own people. But Priam, who had always been kind to her, saw her flinch at their words and put out his hand to draw her near to him. "Dear child," he said, "I do not blame you for what has come to pass. It is the will of the high gods that has brought this evil between your people and mine." Helen wept and said, "Always you have dealt gently with me, but I wish that I had died before I left my marriage lord and my babe, shameless as I am, and come with Paris across the sea to bring so much sorrow upon us all." She would have covered her face and drawn back from the edge of the roof, but Priam held her at his side, asking her the names of this one and that one among the Greek heroes, to turn her thoughts a little in another way, and so they remained for a while side by side, looking down. Below, in the open space between the armies, a rough altar had been set up. The two lambs were sacrificed in a religious rite, and a great oath was taken by the leaders of both sides to abide by the outcome of the combat, whatever it might be. Remember, the word abide means to go through with. So no matter what happens, they're supposed to keep to the agreement. Then a square fighting ground was marked off, and while the two champions faced each other, two wooden lots, one marked for Paris and one for Menelaus, were put into a helmet, and Hector shook them up to decide who should cast the first spear. In this context, the word cast means throw the first spear. And remember, when you cast lots or casting lots, it's to make some kind of a decision. So right now, they're trying to decide who gets to throw the first spear. Will it be Menelaus or will it be Paris? Here's some good graphics about two of our vocabulary words. Crest, which means, of course, the crest of a mountain. You can see the horsehair crest on the top of his helmet. You can see the comb on the top of the helmet. We also have, to your right, a shield boss. And remember, that's a plate in the center of a shield for extra protection. Paris's lot flew out onto the trampled ground. There was a deep breath from those near enough to see. Paris! Paris has the first throw. Paris drew back his spear and made his cast, but his spear point was blunted on the boss of Menelaus' shield and flew uselessly away. Then Menelaus cried out in a mighty voice to the father of the gods, "Great Zeus, grant me my rightful vengeance on this man who did me foul wrong, even while he ate my salt and slept beneath my roof." and he in turn made his cast with all the force of his wrongs behind it. The spear point drove clean through Paris's shield and breastplate and gashed the fine stuff of his tunic, but did not so much as nick the skin beneath, for the Trojan flung himself sideways just in time. With a roar of fury, Menelaus rushed upon him with his great sword held high above his head, but the blade, slashing at the bronze comb of Paris's helmet, shattered into 4 pieces that spun away, bright and blinking in the sunlight. Menelaus threw the useless hilt aside and leapt upon Paris like a panther on its prey, grasped him by the horsehair crest, and began to drag him back towards the Greek lines. But Aphrodite caused the helmet strap to burst apart under Paris's chin, so that Menelaus found himself suddenly with the great crested helmet empty in his hands. He whirled about and flung it into the midst of his own warriors, but when he turned again to finish his enemy, the Trojan prince was nowhere to be seen. Aphrodite had flung a cloak of invisibility about him and swept him back to his own house, safe within the high palace courts of Troy. While Menelaus went raging up and down seeking his enemy, warriors of the Greek host shouted for victory, for by the right of the bargain between them and the Trojans, Helen was now theirs again, and with her on board they could run their ships down from the tide line and sail at long last for their homes. Helen, with her hand in the old king, still looking down from the roof of the gate tower, thought the same. But Aphrodite went to her there, no one else seeing her come save as a flicker in the air like the darting of a bird, and told her, "Come now, back to your own house. Paris, your lord, is there in the great chamber and calling for you." "Paris is no longer any lord of mine. That time is past, and I will not go for all his calling," Helen said. But the goddess of love was not to be so easily refused, and her brow grew dark for all her beauty. "That is proudly spoken, but take care that the love I have shown you until now does not turn to hate. It would be no hard thing to turn the hearts of the Greeks as well as the Trojans against you, and then, between the two, you might indeed find most cruelly the death that you have cried out for." Then Helen was afraid. She pulled her veil across her face and followed the goddess back to her house. In the high chamber, Paris sat on the edge of the bed, unarmed, and looking as though he had come from flutes and dancing rather than a fight, save for the red mark of the helmet strap on his neck. Helen stood before him fierce and bitter and said, "So you have come back from the fighting ground? Hear now my greeting to you. It is this, that I wish you had died out there between the war hosts, at the hand of my true marriage lord, who is a better man than you will ever be." Paris got up and held out his arms. "Nay, honey sweet, those are hard words to a man just back from battle. There will be other times between me and Menelaus. Meanwhile, do not forget the love that I have given you all these years. Do not you forget the sworn bargain that makes me wife to Menelaus again, and no longer woman of yours." Helen glared at him and would have turned away. But Aphrodite knew that if Helen of the fair cheeks went back to her own people, the long war would be over and Troy the loser. Her own promise to Paris would be gone with the wind, and she would look foolish in the eyes of all the gods and would have to bear the mockery of Hera and Athena. She cast her magic upon Helen so that she saw him standing there with his arms held out, as he had stood 10 years ago among the Spartan olive trees with his ship waiting in the harbor, and weeping bitterly but not able to help herself, she went into his arms again and remained with him in the high chamber in Troy. Act 9, the end. This is a beautiful sculpture of Paris. He's very handsome.